Yeah, I think we'll start. I'm gonna quickly start with like drawing on the chalkboard just to kind of show what we're gonna do today and also a little bit of review. So today's demo, the goal is to get you guys to understand how to build a table view. The app we're gonna be building is quite simple. It'll have a single table view, each of which has a cell. We're gonna be laying it out as a contacts app. So you can think of each cell as a person, represent the contact. You click on the contact, it goes to another view where you can edit the contact. This is very similar to your project, but we're going to be implementing the contacts in the table view as a list of people, as opposed to just a single screen where you can update things. So in terms of this screen as a whole, I want to draw the MVC. We have our main view controller. And this view controller, also tell me if you guys can't read what I'm writing. This view controller owns a table view. And it also owns the cells that go into this table view. So again, that's the screen. This table view is on top of this view controller. And these cells, this view controller's job is to take these cells, fill them with data, and put it in this table view. And then you can see our model is going to just be in this view. And for this to work properly, right, for us to update our table view with the correct people and the correct cells, it has a pre-built-in protocol kind of communication where this table view implements what's called a delegate and it implements a data source. As you're using the table view, let's say you scroll, let's say you click, whatever you do, if you scroll and a new cell needs to appear, this table view will access this data source and ask our view controller up here, okay, what should I display? How should I lay out my cell? So forth and so forth. That's going to just be the first screen. So just a quick kind of like what is in the data source and the delegate. In our data source, we're going to have all of the functions that this table view needs to update itself. And by the way, this has all been implemented as well, right? This is a table view, pre-implemented UITableViews. So one thing it might need to know is how many cells there are. So it's going to have a function that asks number of cells, and it's also going to need to know what is in those cells, right? It's going to ask, okay, how many cells, and then for each cell, what is in the cell? And that's what we call our cell for row app. Then our delegate function has more interesting stuff. Delegate is not asking for data, it's instead delegating functionality. So for example, if I click on a cell in here, then this table view knows that it's being clicked on, but the view controller doesn't. So we want to delegate that functionality back up to the view controller and have a method for telling the view controller, hey, this cell was clicked at this position. And so in our delegate, we have a function that we're going to use called did select. So this is going to have did select. And that's kind of the gist. I'll go back to this later. Yes.
Right. That's with the context report.
This is our table view. So you have the table view cell, and then the view controller for the right. Yeah. So we're gonna build everything, but this is already built. I'm gonna have a little plan for today. There's four parts to the demo. The first part is going to be adding the table view. I'll just write TV, stands for table view. This is just going to be adding a table view to the view, constraining it, all that fun stuff. The second part is going to be, I guess, connecting these data source and delegate functions, right? So making the table view actually interact with the data. The third part is custom cells. So here we're gonna now make a cell and then say this table view can work with whatever the hell we want to input. And lastly is this whole update part here. So pushing to a new view controller, updating the data, and then going back and updating that view controller. So this is update contact. Nice. So if you haven't seen this already, please download the starter code. Gives us a whole lot of code that will make all of that easier to implement. That wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. So once we download it, you're gonna see if you run it, you should just get a page that says contacts at the top. If anyone is struggling to get to this place or struggling at any point with any other stuff, with Tiffany here, she can go run around and help you. Just raise your hand and look at her or something. Just to quickly walk through this again, this is our view controller, right? That's the big circle up there. Our view controller has a list of contacts, and you can see that list is implemented here, where each person gets created and added to this list of contacts. I can go into contacts to see what contacts actually has. It's just a class. It has the picture name and the name. So name is like the name of the person, and the contact picture name correlates with this name in the assets folder, right? The name of the image we want to use. And then, yes. Under lecture demo?
It seems to be the same demo from Monday, but not this one.
Yeah.
Another one you're looking for.
That's so weird.
My brother back and this is process.
Oh yeah, okay. That was not supposed to happen. That's, I guess, our fault. I don't think it would actually be an L6. So you have the right file, but nobody else does?
I have the right file, but after I refresh it, go back to the before I refresh it was L6 started.
Okay, this is annoying. Give me like 1 second. I'm gonna update the textbook really quickly, and then we're gonna figure that out. So
You just airdrop everyone. That's fine.
I think that'll take way longer than me just uploading the textbook, updating the textbook. That was because I didn't refresh, by the way, and I downloaded the old demo and got the one that I wanted. Okay, I think the new one should be updated. Yes. So you can, okay, yeah. So go to the textbook, press Command Shift R to reload it and refresh the cache. And then you should see a file that says lecture L6 starter.zip instead of demo4. But once you have that downloaded, that is the correct project we want to use. I guess because it was my mistake, I'll give everyone like a minute or so to get that downloaded. Let me know if anyone's still having trouble with that. Yeah. Is anyone still downloading stuff? Cool. So you should, once you open it and run it, hopefully have the correct file. You'll get a screen that looks like this with contacts. And again, just to review what I said like 10 seconds ago, the contacts is a separate class, which has a picture name and a name. And then we initialize our model as a list of contacts, as a list of people. Cool. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to add a UI table view. So just like adding any other view, at the very top here, we make our variable, let table view equal UI table view. And then in our view did load, we have this little to do right where we need to add it to the view. So I can say self.view.add subview table view. And anytime you add a view, because we're dealing with manual constraints, we do table view.translates equals false. So these 3 lines add a view. Also, you'll see that I'm constantly using autocomplete. This is something this lecture will very much highlight, the power of Swift's autocomplete. I can type in 3 letters and it predicts exactly what I want, this giant string. And that'll be very useful when dealing with data source and delegate functions, but just, it's good to practice it now. So we've added it to the view. We've done that. Now we set up constraints. So to set up constraints, ns layout.active, we make a new list. And then in this list, I'm going to just attach it to the view. So I'm going to say the top equal to top, leading, trailing, and bottom. They're all going to be equal to the super views. So table view, top anchor, I'm going to constrain equal to our self.view.top anchor. And I can do this with all of them. So table view.bottom anchor, constrain equal to self.view bottom anchor, and so forth. So trailing for the right side, and then leading for the left side. Now just to test that this actually works, well, I guess you guys are finishing that out. Up here, right next to when I add the table view, if I set the table view's background color, and you guys don't have to do this, this is just for demonstration, equal to like .red, for example, and I rerun, our table view will hopefully be added, and it will display the entire page is red, right? We've constrained the top, the leading, the trailing, and the bottom, so the whole screen is red. Just a fun thing, I think we mentioned this a few lectures ago, but instead of constraining to the direct top, if I want to give some padding for, the time, the contact stuff and whatnot, I can change this from top anchor to self.view.safeAreaLayoutGuide.top anchor. And then if I rerun that, it'll constrain the table view. It'll give a safe area at the top, which then doesn't constrain past the navigation bar. And that's good. We don't want our cells running off the screen, right? So I'm going to then just delete the red part. And yay, that was step 1. We've added our table view to the view. Now on to step 2, which is actually making it work. So the first thing is to do is to connect the table views delegate and data source to this view controller, right? In the top right drawing, sorry, it's a little dim, but we have two arrows in the table view, one pointing for delegate, one pointing to data source. We set that here, table view dot delegate equal to self, and table view dot data source equal to self. That basically connects the arrows and says this table view's delegate is going to be referencing self, and data source is going to be referencing self. Again, we get errors here that says cannot assign value UI view controller to any table view delegate. It's because we haven't actually said that the table view is going to implement this. So down here where it says conform to UI table view delegate and data source is where we can extend our view controller and have it implement that. So I can write extension of our view controller, where this extension is going to be the UI table view delegate functions. And I'm going to have a second one where this view controller is going to implement the data source functions. So you remember from protocols define a list of functions, and then whoever implements them actually implements them. This is where we'll implement them. And we can see we're getting another error here that says that this data source requires a few functions. For you to actively be a data source, I can just click this to fix it and have it add that. It needs to be able to tell the table view how many rows in each section and what is the self a row at. Right, this is code that just, again, the table view requests data, and this code is what's supposed to give that data back to the table view. So number of rows in section, we just want that to be equal to the number of people in our contact list, right? Yes.
I'm getting an error saying the function component. And it seems like it is already. Oh, I just have to. Okay.
So if you have your UI table view delegate and data source up here, as opposed to in the extensions down here, it'll give you redundant conformance.
Am I supposed to get rid of it on top?
Yeah, this is just supposed to be UI view controller. So at the top, we just want this part being the UI view controller, and then this part, the same like circle in our image, is also going to implement the delegate and the data source. But we want to keep those as extensions just because it makes our code significantly neater. Does anyone have any other questions? Cool. So again, the number of rows in section, we want that to be equal to the number of people in this contacts list. So I can just say for this number of rows in section that I want to return the contacts.count. We're just going to count the number of rows and return that, and that's going to be how many rows we want in our section. That's pretty simple. The next part though, self for row at, which if you look at this actual function, is giving you an index path, which represents where the cell is. So if you look at index path has a section and a row, and it wants a table view cell. So this function gives you the row, and then it asks you to return a table view cell. So again, Elvis briefly talked about this. As we scroll, we want to reuse cells. So this is where that whole reuse identifier will come into play. But to start that, I'm going to have a string at the top that's reuse identifier. Reuse ID, and I'm going to just put my cell. I can put any string I want, just it has to be consistent. And when we're setting up our table view, we can register a cell that we want to be reused. So I can say table view dot register, and then I'm going to autocomplete with this 4-cell reuse identifier. And our reuse identifier here is just going to be the reuse ID that we had. And this like nib placeholder represents what we're going to reuse. So I'm going to just put the default table view cell, UI table view cell dot self, which will tell it reuse the default table view cell with this ID. And now that I have it registered in the table view, whenever I need that, I can what's called DQ it. So down here, I can say, I can have a new variable be my cell is table view, and I just DQ the cell that I want with identifier reuse ID. You'll see that this DQ function, oh, I guess you can't see that, returns a UI table view cell. So we get our table view cell that we're reusing. But on top of the identifier, there's actually another term that we want, which is for index path. So since our table view is handling all this updating stuff, we're going to give it the row and the section that we want the cell to come from. And then we get an error saying missing return. We just need to give that cell back. Return cell. Now, just to kind of demo this, if I put this, since this is a default table view cell, default table view cells come with a default label. So I think that is called text label. I can say cell text label.text equals hello, and then rerun. And this is all I need to set up a very simple table view, where you can see in the app, we now have 8 hellos, because for every cell, we're dequeuing the cell at the position and we're filling it with hello. But again, this is a contacts page. So instead of hello, if I wanted to get the actual person of that list, I can, let's say, make a person. I can make a variable representing that person. So let current person equal my contacts list, and then I'm going to just get the row. So index path dot row. This represents the row. We're just indexing our array, asking which row, and that gives us the person. Yes. It should have a default text label. Okay, nice. And this is where autocomplete really helps, because a lot of spelling, which I am personally very bad at, I can just type in the first few letters and click enter, and then it'll spell it for me. Yay. So instead of hello, I'm going to replace hello with our current person's name. And then if I run it again, you'll see the list of names popping up. So for every cell, this function gets called with an index path representing the row. It gets the person in our list, and that attaches to the label in the cell. Yes.
Can you explain what is index path again? So it's is it a numbered index, or it's like a special?
Yeah. So it functions as a numbered index. The reason that it's an index path is because with table views, there's sections too, right? If you remember from like settings page or whatever, you have different sections, and each section has your own set of rows. So to store both, you can see I'm going to just autocomplete stuff. I can put index path dot section as well. So index path is just a way to kind of like take those two and group them together, representing the row. Great question. Nice. So that's part 2. We have our basic delegate and data source functions. Does anyone have any questions on that before we fill it in with custom cells? Or does anyone want me to scroll anywhere if you missed anything? Yes. Yes. So our reuse ID is just a string. And in this register, we basically tell the table view that we're going to be reusing this type of cell, which is just a default cell. We're going to reuse this default cell, and we're going to stick an ID onto it. So that way, when we are actually asked to provide what cell we want, we can use that ID to say this type of cell. This gets useful if, for example, you have different types of cells in the same table view. Let's say you want a cell, actually in the settings page, I don't have a picture, but the first cell in every settings page is this weird like Apple Cloud cell that has an image and other stuff, and then every other cell is just a label. So I can register 2 different types of cells and just choose which one I want to DQ using their IDs. Cool. Nice. So The next step is we're going to take this UI table view cell and we're going to replace it with our own custom table view cell. So to do that, we need to make a new file. So of here, I right click and say new file. I'm going to make it a Cocoa Touch class, which will give me an option to make a subclass of type. Make sure this subclass is of type UITableViews cell. For me, it's defaulted that way because I was using them previously. For you, it'll probably default to view controller. Yeah. Make it a Cocoa Touch class and it'll generate a Swift file. But yes. And then for here, I'm going to just change the name, the first text field, to custom table view cell. And we're not creating an XIB and the language is Swift. So just the important thing is you get to change your name. I'm adding custom and the subclass of type UITableViews cell. And then it's going to ask me where I want to store it. And I'm going to just put the default location. And then you can see on the left, we now have this new file, which is a custom table view cell. This gives us functions originally. You can see it is just a Swift file with a class and a whole bunch of default functions. But we're not going to need either of these for this demo, so I'm going to just delete them. And we have a default class, custom table view cell of type UITableView cell. Instead of those custom functions, I want an init function, which again, this is where autocomplete gets really helpful because I'm going to press enter and I don't remember any of that, but I just typed init and press enter and I got that beautiful line of code. And because we're overriding, this has to do with like class hierarchies, which we're not going to explain. Every time you see an override, we need a super. So super.init and then style, I'm going to just copy style and reuse identifier. I'm going to just copy reuse identifier. That should set up our init function. And then we're going to get an error that says we need a second required init, which we can just fix, but you can also just ignore because again, we never need this. Nice. So in our custom table view cell, I want to just draw it out right here. It's a cell. What I want to do is I want to have an image of a person right here, and I want to have a label of their name. So this class represents this single table view cell. And to implement it, I need two variables, the image profile pic and a label representing the label person of the label representing the name. So I'm going to say name. And then since this is a view, we have to do all the same stuff as before. We have to add it to the view. We have to translate auto resizing mouse to false. We have to constrain it. So all of that fun stuff, which we can do here in the init function. So to start, I'm going to add it to the view. This time, because it's a table view cell, we're adding it to a content view. Not just a view, it's the content view, just because it's a cell. We add subview, profile pic, and then we can add the subview of our name. And then again, anytime you see add subview, we need the translates equals false. So profile pic dot translates equals false. And then name dot translates equals false. And just for funsies, I'm going to change the font. So instead of just rolling with the default font, I'm going to say new font as soon as my, okay, name.font equals UI font dot system font of size 15. This is just to demonstrate that if you want to change your styling of your app, you do it right when you add it. You can change things like the font, the color, the size, whatever you want. I'm just changing the font for funsies. And then just like before, we're going to have a function to constrain. So set up constraints. And then we call this function in our init. For this function? No. At objc is solely for functions called by buttons. This is just a function that we're making, so we don't need that. Cool. So again, to mimic this image, we want our profile picture to be a square, and we want its top anchor to be against the top of the cell and the bottom anchor to be against the bottom of the cell. So I'm going to say profile picture dot top anchor constrained equal to self dot content view this time top anchor, and then same with bottom. Bottom anchor dot constrain equal to self dot content view bottom anchor. That constrains the top and the bottom. I'm going to constrain the width and the height to be equal to a relative width of the screen. So just to explain that, I want my view's width to be 1/3 the size of my entire cell, right? And we can just do that with profile picture dot width dot constrain equal to with the multiplier equal to self dot content views width, except the multiplier is going to be 1/3. It needs a 0. And then lastly, to constrain the height, I'm going to just say I want it to be fully square. So the height, I'm going to constrain to the width with a multiplier of 1. So profile picture dot height anchor dot constrain equal to profile picture dot width anchor with a multiplier of 1, because they should be equal. Height and width should be equal. That should set up our profile picture. Yes.
Do we have to put 1, or we can just ignore the multiplier?
It gives us a multiplier. And you just put if it allows you to, it allows you to, I guess. But okay, yeah. So I guess you don't. Nice. Then I'm gonna make another set of constraints this time for my label, where I'm gonna just have the label be in the center of the Y and up against the image with a little bit of spacing. So to do that, I'm gonna say my name label's leading anchor is gonna be constrained equal to profile picture's trailing anchor. Again, we're constraining the labels leading to the profiles trailing with a constant of, let's say 30, for example. And then name dot center Y is going to be the same as the view center Y, self dot content view dot center Y. Nice. So that should be the bulk of the cell. We need a comma here. So we basically made our custom cell, and we basically have it laid out. Now, the next order of business is to replace the default cell with the custom cell. Yes.
Sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, you're good. Ask as many as you want.
So for defining leading anchor and center Y anchor, but not how wide it can go. So let's say you have a super long name that will overflow the screen.
Yes. That's a great point. And that's why we use full constraints. So if you were developing this app for like a company or an industry or whatever, you would have to make sure everything was constrained. So that, like in this case, if I do have a really long label, it'll just go off the screen and you'll just miss half the label, right? We're just doing this to save time at the moment, but everything should be fully constrained with the width and the height. Great point. Cool. So now we go back to our view controller and we want to replace our default table view cell with the custom cell that we just made. So in here, when we register this UI table view cell, this default cell, I can just replace that with the custom table view cell that I just made. So now we're registering this as a custom table view cell. But down here, when we DQ it, we're still getting back from this DQ function a default table view cell. So this is where we need to cast it and say at the back of this line, let cell equal table view DQ with as custom table view cell. And this is actually an optional cell. So this as question mark custom table view cell. The reason it's optional is because this DQ doesn't actually know if the cell that it's registered with the identifier can be considered a custom cell, or if it is just like a default cell. So this cell is optional and everything after this gets mad. So again, with optionals, we can change this let to an if let, and then put all of this stuff inside my curly braces, which means that in this if let, we've basically said if it isn't nil, then we can do all this stuff. And then we need an else, we're gonna just return an empty table view cell. But again, this should never happen because we've registered a custom table view cell. This would be the case as if you've registered two different types of cells and you accidentally DQ'd the wrong one and casted it into the incorrect one. But now, since our cell is of type custom table view cell, we no longer need this default label. We can use our custom label. So cell.name.text is going to be equal to our current person's name, and our cell.profilepicture.image is going to be equal to a new image named our current person.contact pic name. And then here, if I rerun this, you'll see that hopefully it'll update the table views with the way we want them to. Yay! Now they're displaying images. They're using our custom cells. Cool. Just a thing to keep in mind, just good development practices. If you're building an app that has each cell displaying a lot of information, you don't want to have all of that information in here. You want to actually hand that off to the cells, the custom cells functionality to handle. So what I mean by that is in custom table view cell, we can add another function that says update from, and then here I'm going to just put a contact of type, or update from person of type contact, where this is where I'm going to run the updates. So from that other function, instead of updating each label manually, I'm going to just pass the contact into this function, and then this cell will handle all the stuff like name.text equals person.name and profile picture dot image equals UI image named person dot contact pic name. So with this function, I can go back to this view controller, and then instead of setting this here, right, we have this function down here to set it. I can just call the cells function. I'm going to erase these and say cell dot update from person and just pass in the current person. And then that way we pass the data directly to the cell, and then the cell updates everything. Yes. It's essentially the same code as the other thing, just with person instead of whatever the other thing is named. Cool. Does anyone have any questions on that? Yes.
Getting all cells or like white cell? I think there's one thing you don't like from above.
You're getting what?
Like everything was one by itself out blank. Yeah, no name and no image.
Did you update that?
Where
Do you
before
want to
the
just go look and see what you're doing? Oh, is it in view control? Is it, make sure they register the custom cell.
Oh, it's custom.
Yeah, so that way we're now using our custom cell instead of the default cell. I can actually delete these two lines if it makes it easier, but I'm just commenting now. Yes. Can people see this board, or should I turn the light temporarily on? I'm gonna just assume that that means people can see it. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to part 4? Nice. So we have our system over there, which I'm gonna just redraw. We have our view controller, which has a table view and a cell. But this time, this drawing is going to represent updating it, right? So when I click on a button and this gets, when we did select, because this is all wrapped in a navigation controller, this will push to a new view controller. That's like on the image on the left top, that's the screens pushing to the next screen. And then because this is mediated by a view controller, if I press back, for example, all of this will delete. So in this, if we push to a new screen and want to update the old screen, let's say this new screen is going to have, actually, before I draw that, I'm going to just write like a few lines of code. In our view controller here, we can, let me think. Okay, actually, no, yeah, I'm going to draw it out and then we'll code. Sorry. So we push to a new screen, right? This is going to be the update screen. So this you probably already have built in projects, the last project, where you have a whole bunch of text fields, you click the button and it passes the data back. This is kind of a review of that project too. So what happens is to pass data back, you have everything updated, we need to implement our own protocol method. Here, let's say I wanted to change people's names. I can define a function here, and then I can implement this protocol in our table view over here. And then whenever somebody presses save in our new view controller, it'll call this function over here. So that's just the general flow, and I'll reference that as we continue coding. But you'll see, luckily, that our detail view controller, the controller that we're pushing to, has already been fully coded. Yes. What is that? Tiffany, do you want to help? Yeah. Okay. So this detail view controller has been mostly implemented for us, right? You can see we have an image view, we have a text field, a button, they've all been added. We have some nice styling stuff, and they've all been constrained. One note about this here is this init asks for a contact. So we can pass in a contact through this to set everything up with a specific contact in mind. So in my view controller, again, we want to push to this view controller when something is tabbed. And to get that, in here, our UITableView delegate, we have a function that's did select row at. And you'll see again, here in the did select row at, we have the index path, which tells us this row was selected, right? If I click on Elvis, which isn't Elvis, that'll say the index path's row is the third row, because we start from 0, the third row. And because of that, I can get the person that that row corresponds to. So I can say, let current person equal contacts index path dot row. And then if I wanted, I can print the current person's name. And just as a demonstration, if I click on people, their like incorrect names will show up, right? If I click here, you can see Elvis prints out, or Robert, and so forth. So now that we have the person, I can make a new instance of this detail view controller. So I'm gonna just call it view controller equal detail view controller. Again, we're passing in the contact because we want to initialize it with our person. So our current person goes in here. And then we want to push to that current person. So this is navigation controller dot push view controller to our VC with animated as true. And then with these 3 lines of code, right? If I click on a person, it goes to this new view controller, everything's laid out correctly, and then I can go back and whatnot. Now, to get this update functionality actually working, if I type in that and I press submit, I want this to update with whatever I've updated my name to be. But that doesn't happen. So the first thing we need to do is, again, we need to set up this style of communication. We need to say, okay, when the user presses on a button, this function gets called, right? Our change contact cell. And in this function, we need to somehow call a function in the other class. And we define that function in a protocol. So I'm going to say protocol update cell. And this is going to be a protocol that only conforms to UI view controllers. So we have that typing there. And then I just make it function definition. So update name with a name as a string. Now this just says, like, it just gives the menu basically of what is needed. And then in our view controller, that's where we actually implement it. So right next to this view controller and other delegates, I can make an extension to our view controller and have that extension be this protocol. So update cell. And then in our update cell, that's where we actually implement the function. So you'll see I can type in update name, it'll give me the function stub, and then we can update the name. So again, our detail view controller, we call this function in our view controller here. That's delegating functionality backwards. But as you may notice, like once we click on a single person, we edit that single person's. When we update the name back here, we don't know whose name to update. And this is one of those things where there's a whole lot of ways to solve that. But the way I'm going to do it is that every time I click on a person, I'm going to save that index. And then when I want to update it, I'm going to know that index because I saved it of which one's updated. So at the very top, next to my other variables, I'm going to make a new variable that's like current index, which is going to be equal to an index path, just a general index path. And then in my delegate, whenever I select the row at, I can just save that index path to my variable. So self.index path equals index path. Oh wait, no, not, it's current index, my bad. This variable, current index, will be equal to the index path of whichever index gets called. And then that way, whenever we update the name, we'll know exactly who's to update. So here I can say contacts, and then the current index is row, and then name equals the new name that I pass in. And then whenever you update the data, you want to also reload the table view. So table view dot reload data. So this is just the functionality to update the name, right? We save whichever index we click on, and then whenever this function gets called by the new view controller, we take that saved index and we update the name with whatever data was passed from this view controller back to that view controller. And then the last step is then connecting our detail view controllers, this arrow here, right? If you think this arrow is us making the view controller, we want to have a variable in here that I'm going to just call delegate that points back to this view controller so we can call the function in here. And the way to do that is up here where we have a to-do add week delegate. we just put weak var delegate is of type, and then this is whatever we named our protocol. So our protocol is named update cell, is of type update cell. And we're going to make it optional because we don't know if that delegate exists. But then whenever this button is clicked, I can just say delegate dot update name with whatever's in the text field. So name text field dot text. So I know I'm kind of rushing because we're running out of time, but this text field is optional. So I'm going to just quickly say let text equal name text field dot text, then we're going to call this delegate function. With this as text. And then the final step is actually connecting this delegate. So again, we've made this variable delegate, which is equal to an optional, so it doesn't exist yet. And whenever we want to call this, we need that delegate to actually point back to the view controller. So in the view controller, again, in our did select, whenever we make this new detail view controller, we say view controller's delegate is equal to self. And if you think about that in terms of this image, we're in this controller. Every time we press a thing, we make a new detail view controller. We say this delegate, this detail view controller's delegate is equal to self. So that's how we set this arrow pointing back at this view controller. And then if all works, we can run it and then it should work perfectly fine. So I can go in here, I can add a whole bunch of ASDFs to my name, submit, and then go back, and you'll see my name has updated. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. Then